The footage flickered to life on Dr. Emmanir Sulth's crystalline display array, intercepted from electromagnetic transmissions bleeding into space from the third planet of System 43. He had been analyzing routine spectral data when the communication suite flagged unusually dense signal traffic. What he saw made his light-refracting form go completely still. On one section of the planet's primary landmass, the ground was tearing itself apart. The translation algorithms identified it as Chile, a narrow geographic region pressed between ocean and mountains. The seismic readings were catastrophic. An 8.9 magnitude earthquake had fractured the continental plate, collapsing structures, rupturing infrastructure, and triggering secondary disasters along a 1,000-kilometer fault line. But that was not what held Emmanir's attention. While the ground still shook, while aftershocks rippled through destabilized terrain, the planet's inhabitants were already responding. Bipedal creatures in orange protective gear were pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. Others were running toward the damage, not away from it. The footage showed one creature carrying an injured juvenile across a field of broken concrete and twisted metal, moving at a pace that Emmanir's biomechanical analysis subroutines flagged as sustained sprint velocity. The creature ran for 17 uninterrupted minutes across deadly terrain while carrying additional mass. Emmanir had been surveying star systems for 46 years. He had cataloged dead worlds and living ones, observed the slow dance of stellar evolution and the violent deaths of civilizations that never developed space travel before their sun's expansion sterilized their home planet. But he had never seen anything like this. Nothing in his experience or training provided context for intelligent life operating in active disaster zones with such coordinated efficiency. Commander Praeth drifted over to his station, her larger crystalline structure casting geometric patterns across the deck. At 39 cycles, she was young for her command, but she had earned the position through an unusual willingness to investigate anomalies rather than simply catalog them. She had requested assignment to deep survey missions specifically because she found the unknown more compelling than the cataloged. Her superiors considered this trait both her greatest strength and her most concerning weakness. She observed the footage for exactly 23 seconds before speaking. "What are we looking at?" Emmanir did not look away from the displays. "I believe we're looking at a normal Tuesday on the third planet." Praeth's crystalline matrix flickered through several color shifts, indicating rapid cognitive processing. "Define normal." The earthquake registers 8.9 on their indigenous scale. Simultaneously, there's an atmospheric vortex system making landfall on another continent with wind velocities exceeding 280 kilometers per hour. Emmanir pulled up the planetary classification data, his structure dimming slightly with a reaction he recognized as disbelief, struggling against observable fact. "Commander, the automated systems have rated this world as Class 12 on the deathworld index." The bridge fell silent. Even Ixil, the junior researcher who typically vibrated with barely contained enthusiasm for minor discoveries, went completely motionless. The young Myrrathi had joined the crew only 8 cycles ago, fresh from the academy with perfect scores in xenobiology and an infectious curiosity that sometimes outpaced his caution. He had been hoping for exactly this kind of assignment, though he had imagined discovering ancient ruins or unusual mineral formations, not watching intelligent beings operate in conditions that should preclude complex life entirely. Class 12. The highest possible rating, a theoretical maximum that indicated conditions so hostile that extremophile bacteria would struggle to survive. In 8,000 years of Myrrathi exploration, they had catalogued exactly 9 Class 12 worlds. All had been utterly barren. "The classification must be malfunctioning," said Venris, the medical officer and ethics observer. Her voice carried harmonic frequencies of dismissal. She had served on survey ships for 62 cycles, longer than anyone else on the bridge, and had developed a deep-rooted belief that the universe operated according to predictable principles. Anomalies, in her experience, were always errors in measurement rather than errors in assumptions. "There's obviously a civilization down there. Complex technology, organized society. That's impossible on a Class 12 world." "Run full diagnostics on all planetary assessment systems," Praeth ordered. Emmanir was already 3 steps ahead, having initiated comprehensive checks the moment he saw the classification. All systems functioning normally. Atmospheric oxygen is 21%, which is in the corrosive range for carbon-based cellular structures. Temperature variance is -89 to +56 degrees Celsius across the surface. Tectonic instability index is 7.2 out of 10. There are currently 1 of 504 active volcanic systems. Weather violence classification is Category 8. The planet's molten iron core generates a protective magnetic field, but the field is unstable and has reversed polarity 183 times in the geological record. He pulled up additional data, each metric more disturbing than the last. The surface is bombarded with micrometeorites due to a sparse asteroid buffer in the outer system. The biosphere includes competitive life forms across all ecological niches, many equipped with chemical weapons, venom delivery systems, or parasitic reproductive strategies. High-band ultraviolet radiation would damage Myrrathi cellular matrices within 2 to 3 hours of unshielded surface exposure. Commander, this planet is designed to kill. And yet something built cities, Corvin observed. The cultural analyst rarely spoke without having processed substantial data, but his tone carried genuine bewilderment. At 54 cycles old, he had analyzed 217 different civilizations across the Confederation's sphere of influence. Not one had developed under conditions even remotely similar to what the sensors were reporting. He knew, with the certainty of experience, that intelligence arose from stable environments where cognitive development could be prioritized over immediate survival. This violated every principle he had spent his career confirming. Ixil was already deep in the electromagnetic scanning arrays, his facets dark with concentration. I'm detecting structured radio transmissions across multiple frequency bands, and I'm seeing artificial light sources on the night side, thousands of them, maybe millions. The main display reconfigured to show the electromagnetic spectrum analysis overlaid on the planetary image. The entire globe lit up with radio chatter, satellite networks, and concentrated light sources marking settlements across 6 continental landmasses. The sheer volume of communication suggested a technological civilization in full flower, not struggling survivors clinging to existence in hostile conditions. Venris made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. This violates every principle of xenobiological development we have. Intelligence doesn't arise on deathworlds. It can't. The environmental pressures are too extreme. Evolution optimizes for survival, not cognition. Higher brain function is energetically expensive and provides no advantage when resources are scarce and threats are constant. Apparently, evolution disagrees with our theories, Praeth said quietly, though her own thoughts churned with similar doubts. She had read the same xenobiological texts, passed the same certification examinations. Everything in her training suggested Venris was correct, and yet the evidence before them was undeniable. For exactly 44 seconds, nobody on the bridge spoke. They simply stared at the impossible data scrolling across their displays, watching a world that should not exist, harboring life that should not have survived long enough to develop language, let alone space-capable technology. Then, Ixil made a small sound of discovery. Commander, they're not just communicating locally, they're broadcasting into space, deliberately. There are multiple transmission arrays designed specifically for deep space communication. They're looking for us. Praeth's crystalline structure went through a cascade of color shifts that Emmanir had learned to recognize as her decision-making process accelerating. This was the moment every survey commander dreaded and hoped for simultaneously. The discovery of intelligent life always carried profound implications, but intelligent life that was actively seeking contact changed everything. We invoke the preservation directive immediately, she said, her tone carrying the weight of command. No transmissions on any frequency, full passive observation mode. We go dark and we watch. She looked at each crew member in turn, making certain they understood the gravity of the situation. Emmanir, I want complete biological analysis. Corvin, cultural assessment. Ixil, monitor all electromagnetic output and begin translation protocols. Venris, compile ethical considerations for potential contact, should contact become necessary. Van, deploy a cloaked observation satellite. Van, the navigation officer who rarely offered opinions but possessed unmatched technical expertise, was already running deployment calculations. The quiet Myrrathi had served on exploration vessels for 41 cycles and had developed an almost intuitive understanding of orbital mechanics. Observation post Theta can achieve stable geosynchronous orbit in 17 hours. Cloaking field will render us effectively invisible to any technology this species currently possesses. As the crew reconfigured their instruments and began the complex process of deploying their observation satellite, Emmanir found himself staring at the footage still playing on his display. A human, as the translation algorithms would later identify them, was pulling another human from wreckage. The rescuer's biological readings showed elevated stress hormones, minor injuries, and signs of physical exhaustion. But the creature never stopped moving, never gave up, just kept digging through debris with bleeding appendages until the trapped individual was free. Observation post. Theta achieved stable orbit 3 hours ahead of schedule. The small satellite, wrapped in a cloaking field that bent electromagnetic radiation around its hull, began its silent vigil. Within the first 6 hours, it had intercepted over 8,000 distinct communication channels. Ixil approached the language barrier with systematic intensity born from genuine fascination. The Myrrathi had refined their translation algorithms over millennia, building sophisticated pattern recognition systems that could parse alien languages from context and structure. Those systems assumed certain linguistic universals based on species that evolved in environments similar to the Garden Ring, the region of space where all known intelligent life had developed. This was different. By the end of Day 3, Ixil had identified 19 distinct language families. By Day 5, he had compiled a working vocabulary of the most common language, which appeared to serve as a lingua franca for global communication. On Day 7, he made an announcement that would fundamentally challenge xenolinguistic theory. "They don't just have multiple languages," he explained during the morning briefing, his structure vibrating with the excitement of discovery. "They have multiple language families with completely separate evolutionary origins. They developed abstract symbolic communication at least 7 different times in geographically isolated populations. Then, instead of one language conquering all others through technological dominance, they maintained the diversity. They're teaching their offspring multiple linguistic systems simultaneously." Corvin's matrix flickered with the colors of deep analysis. He had been reviewing thousands of hours of intercepted cultural transmissions, and each new data cluster seemed to contradict the previous one. That suggests extraordinary cognitive flexibility. Most species optimize for a single communication framework once they achieve technological civilization. Maintaining multiple systems is energetically expensive and cognitively demanding. There's no evolutionary advantage. "Unless the advantage is redundancy," Ixil said. "I've been analyzing their technological infrastructure. Every critical system has multiple backups. Every communication method has alternatives. They don't optimize for efficiency. They optimize for survival through redundancy. When one system fails, 3 others are already in place." Emmanir had been conducting his biological analysis with growing fascination and deepening discomfort. The scans were detailed enough now to provide cellular-level information, and each data point seemed to contradict basic principles of evolutionary biology. "They're persistence predators," he reported on Day 8. "Bipedal vertebrates with skeletal structure optimized for endurance locomotion. They evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They can run for hours without stopping. More than that, they can maintain moderate activity for days. They have specialized thermoregulation that excretes liquid through their skin to prevent overheating." He displayed the biomechanical analysis. "But here's the paradox. They lack natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. Their skin is remarkably fragile. A simple puncture wound can introduce fatal pathogens. They can die from exposure to harmless proteins in their environment. Their immune systems sometimes attack benign substances like groundnuts or shellfish with potentially lethal force. They're simultaneously over-defensive and catastrophically vulnerable." On Day 12, Emmanir discovered something that made even less evolutionary sense. He had been analyzing human cognitive function through their cultural output when he noticed an unusual pattern in their scientific methodology. They see patterns that don't exist, he reported to Praeth during a private consultation. Their brains are hardwired to find connections even in random data. It's called pareidolia. They see faces in clouds, meaningful shapes in chaos, intentional design in coincidence. It's a cognitive flaw by any logical standard. Praeth studied the examples he provided. Humans claiming to see religious imagery in burn marks on food, finding animal shapes in stellar constellations that were just random spatial distributions, creating elaborate mythologies from coincidental patterns in their night sky. How does a species develop advanced science with such flawed perception? That's what's extraordinary, Emmanir said, his structure shifting through colors of revelation. Their greatest scientists describe moments of intuitive leaps, connections made before logical proof existed. They call it insight. One of their physicists visualized riding a beam of light and developed a revolutionary theory of space-time from that imagined experience. Another dreamed the structure of a complex molecule. They guess, and sometimes they guess correctly, and those correct guesses drive their entire technological development forward. That's not science, Venris said, listening from her station. That's gambling. It's both, Emmanir replied. They gamble, then they verify. They intuit, then they test. They feel their way toward truth, then they prove it with mathematics. It shouldn't work, but it does. Corvin had been analyzing human cultural output with systematic patience, reviewing thousands of documents, recordings, and artistic works. On day 15, he presented findings that shifted the crew's understanding fundamentally. They don't just survive their world, he said, displaying footage that made Venris's structure darken with disbelief. They celebrate surviving it. The footage showed humans deliberately jumping from aircraft at 4,000 meters altitude, relying on fabric parachutes to arrest their fall. Others strapped wooden boards to their feet and slid down frozen mountains at lethal velocities. Still others dove from cliffs into water, the impact force alone sufficient to cause internal injuries. Some attached elastic cords to their legs and leaped from bridges, trusting the cord's tensile strength against gravitational acceleration. This is entertainment, Corvin said. They pay to watch this. The participants are celebrated as athletes. It's a respected cultural activity across multiple societies. Venris made a sound like cracking ice. They have a death wish. This entire species is psychologically unstable. But Emmanir was beginning to see a different pattern. No, they're adapted, perfectly adapted. They evolved on a world that killed anything insufficiently persistent, insufficiently willing to take risks for potential reward. Natural selection favored the individuals who would attempt impossible things. The ones who enjoyed the fear response were the ones who survived long enough to reproduce. They're not insane. They're optimized for a world we can barely imagine surviving. Over the following days, the observational data accumulated into a comprehensive picture. Humans were pattern seekers and meaning makers who created art that served no survival purpose but filled some deep psychological need. They made music from organized sound waves. They told stories to transmit cultural information. They developed complex mathematical systems that allowed them to predict phenomena they couldn't directly observe. They built machines to extend their limited sensory range, compensating for physical inadequacies through technological innovation. On day 22, Emmanir discovered they leaked salt water from their eyes when experiencing strong emotions. Any strong emotion, sadness, joy, fear, overwhelming beauty, even laughter carried to extremes. It was involuntary and universal across all human populations. That's absurd, Venris said when he reported it. Why would evolution develop such an inefficient response? Salt water is a precious resource. Leaking it uncontrollably serves no purpose. Perhaps it serves a social purpose, Ixil suggested. The junior researcher had been studying human social bonding behaviors and was developing theories about their pack dynamics. It's a visible signal of emotional state that cannot be easily faked. Other humans respond to these signals by offering assistance or comfort. It strengthens social bonds. It's still inefficient, Venris insisted, though her certainty was beginning to waver under the weight of accumulated evidence. Then, on day 31, Ixil made a discovery that changed everything. The junior researcher appeared on the bridge with his crystalline structure cycling through colors Emmanir had never seen him display before. Alarm and excitement and confusion layered together in rapidly shifting patterns. His youth and enthusiasm, usually assets in research, now carried an edge of genuine fear. "They know we're here," Ixil said. Every crew member turned to stare at him. The bridge, which had maintained a constant hum of activity during the observation period, fell completely silent. "Explain," Praeth said sharply. "I've been monitoring their communications about astronomy and space observation. There's an organization called the Deep Space Detection Initiative. 3 weeks ago, they detected what they're calling an orbital anomaly. They've designated it Object Theta. They've measured its position to within 8 meters. They know something is there, Commander. They know exactly where we are." "That's impossible," Van said, speaking for only the third time since they had arrived in the system. His role required precision, not conversation, and he rarely wasted energy on the latter. "The cloaking field is operating at 99.97% efficiency. No species at their technological level should be able to detect us." "But not 100%, Ixil said. "There are minute variations in background radiation, gravitational perturbations. If their sensors are sensitive enough and if they know what to look for, they could detect the distortion pattern." Emmanir felt his structure go cold with a sensation the Myrrathi rarely experienced: genuine fear. They've never encountered cloaking technology. How would they know what to look for? Corvin was already pulling up human scientific literature, his analysis systems processing thousands of documents simultaneously. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonic signature of significant realization. They predicted it. They have theoretical frameworks for stealth technology, including gravitational lensing, electromagnetic distortion, and dimensional phase shifting. They wrote papers about detection methodologies for cloaking systems they've never seen. Then, they built sensors to find those theoretical ships. "Why?" Venris asked, her structure pulsing with colors of incomprehension. "Why would they waste resources preparing for something that doesn't exist? It's irrational." "Because they've been looking for us," Corvin said quietly. "For over 100 years, they've been systematically searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. They've been broadcasting messages into space, building monuments designed to be visible from orbit, developing detection systems for any sign that they're not alone. Being alone terrifies them more than being found." Ixil pulled up the latest human transmissions, and now they've found a sign. They're analyzing the anomaly, running simulations. They're being methodical and careful. But Commander, their communications carry emotional markers that the algorithms identify as hopeful anticipation. Praeth stood from her command station. Her crystalline form caught the ambient light in sharp geometric patterns as she processed the implications. This was no longer simple observation. They had been discovered, and that changed everything. The Preservation Directive was clear about such situations, but it had been written assuming far more time before detection. Days, not weeks. Certainly not while they were still compiling basic observational data. "We need to make a decision," she said. "We can leave now, report this to the Confederation, and let them determine appropriate protocols, or we can stay and learn more." "We should leave," Venris said immediately, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies of certainty born from decades of service. "We've already violated the Preservation Directive by conducting long-term observation without authorization. If they confirm our presence, this becomes a first contact situation, and we are not authorized to make that decision unilaterally. The consequences for unauthorized contact are severe, Commander. Court-martial, potential exile. We must report and withdraw." "How long until they confirm our presence?" Praeth asked, looking at Ixil. The junior researcher checked his data, running probability calculations based on the human's current analysis rate. Based on their computational capabilities and methodological approach, between 72 and 96 hours. "And how long to charge the dimensional drive for a safe distance jump?" Van ran the calculations with his characteristic precision. 48 hours minimum for sufficient charge to reach Confederation space. Praeth's matrix flickered through rapid color shifts as she weighed options, consequences, and responsibilities. She had not risen to command by avoiding difficult decisions, but this was the kind of choice that could define or destroy a career. More importantly, it could determine how two species' first encounter proceeded. History pivoted on such moments. Then we have a window, she decided. We continue passive observation. We gather everything we can about how humans respond to potential contact. We compile comprehensive data. Then, we make the jump before they confirm our presence, and we report to the Confederation with information detailed enough to make intelligent policy decisions. Van, begin dimensional drive charging sequence now. Nobody objected. The decision was made. For 46 hours, the crew worked with focused intensity. They analyzed, they compiled, they debated. The humans, unaware of the full extent of their scrutiny, continued their methodical analysis of the orbital anomaly they had designated Object Theta. Their calculations grew more precise, their models more refined. They were close to confirmation. Then, at hour 45, Van's voice cut through the bridge activity with sharp alarm that was entirely uncharacteristic for the usually emotionless navigator. Solar Monitoring Station is detecting a coronal mass ejection, Class 3 event. Source, the primary star. Praeth was at his station in seconds, her structure moving with a speed that suggested genuine alarm. Trajectory? Direct impact on the third planet. Arrival time, 68 hours. The bridge went silent. Emmanir's analysis systems immediately began calculating the consequences, running models he had hoped never to use. A Class 3 coronal mass ejection carried enough charged particles and electromagnetic radiation to strip away unshielded satellites. The radiation pulse would fry unprotected electronics. Power grids would experience catastrophic failures as induced currents exceeded design tolerances. Communications would go dark, and millions would die, not from the radiation itself, which the planet's magnetic field would deflect, but from the cascading infrastructure collapse. Medical systems dependent on electrical power would fail, transportation networks would cease, food distribution would halt. In a tightly integrated technological civilization, every system depended on every other system. The cascade would be devastating. "Do the humans know?" Praeth asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Ixil was checking, scanning their astronomical communications and research networks. "Their solar observation capabilities are primitive compared to ours. They won't detect it for another 8 to 10 hours. Even then, they might not calculate the full impact until it's almost here. Their monitoring networks are fragmented across multiple institutions with limited coordination." The terrible calculus was obvious to everyone on the bridge. If the Myrrathi said nothing, humanity would face the solar storm with limited warning, insufficient time to implement comprehensive protective measures. Millions would die. Perhaps tens of millions, depending on how quickly their infrastructure collapsed and how effectively they could coordinate emergency responses. But warning them would mean revealing their presence. It would mean making first contact under emergency conditions. It would mean taking responsibility for a decision that could reshape both species' futures. It would mean Praeth accepting consequences up to and including court-martial for violating the Preservation Directive. The silence stretched for 17 seconds. Emmanir watched Praeth's structure cycle through color patterns of intense internal conflict. He knew what she would decide, had known since the moment she had chosen to stay and observe rather than immediately withdraw. She had already committed to prioritizing the right thing over the safe thing. "We have to tell them," Ixil said, his young voice carrying no uncertainty. He had not yet learned the caution that came with age and experience. He simply saw beings in danger and knew they could help. "We absolutely cannot," Venris countered, her structure darkening with the weight of regulations and protocols that had governed Myrrathi exploration for millennia. "The Preservation Directive exists for a reason. We could contaminate their culture, interfere with their development, cause species-wide psychological trauma when they discover they're not alone. The law is explicit, Commander. Contact must be authorized by the full Confederation Council. We do not have that authority. The law assumes we're not watching millions die when we could prevent it with a simple warning," Emmanir said quietly. He thought of the footage he had watched over 43 days, humans pulling each other from wreckage, running impossible distances to deliver medical supplies, volunteering for rescue operations in toxic conditions. They saved each other. How could the Myrrathi do less? Everyone looked at Praeth. The young commander stood motionless, her form cycling through rapid color shifts faster than Emmanir had ever seen. Each shift represented a different consideration, a different consequence weighed and evaluated. This was the kind of decision that careers ended on, the kind that started wars or prevented them, the kind that no amount of training prepared any commander to make with confidence. "If we warn them," she said slowly, each word carefully chosen, "we violate the preservation directive. I will face court-martial. The crew will face sanctions. Relations with humanity will begin under crisis conditions. We will have fundamentally altered their development, possibly in ways we cannot predict or control." She paused, her structure growing very still. "If we don't warn them, millions die. We returned to Confederation space, knowing we stood by and watched it happen. We had the power to prevent suffering and chose regulations over lives." Venrus moved toward the communication console, her structure rigid with conviction. "Commander, I cannot in good conscience support this decision. I am obligated under ethics protocols to report." Her crystalline appendage reached for the long-range transmitter array that would contact the nearest Confederation monitoring station, bypassing ship command entirely. Praeth moved faster than Emmanir would have thought possible, physically blocking Venrus's access to the controls. "You will not undermine this crew's decision." "It's not a crew decision," Venrus said, her voice carrying frequencies of genuine distress. She was not being obstructive out of malice, but out of deeply held conviction that rules existed for important reasons. "It's your decision, and it's wrong. We need authorization. We need consensus from species who understand the long-term implications. We need to act," Praeth said, her structure brightening with the colors of absolute command. "Right now, immediately. Emmanir, compose the message. Ixil, prepare encrypted transmission protocols. Van, house the dimensional drive. Charging at 73%, we can jump in 18 hours. Then we have time." Praeth turned to Venrus, her structure softening slightly with genuine respect for the ethical position. "I understand your objection. It's noted in the official log. But I'm making this call, and I'm taking full responsibility. If the Confederation court-martials me, I'll face it. But I will not face myself knowing I let this happen when I could have prevented it." Venrus stepped back from the console, her structure dark with internal conflict between duty to regulations and duty to conscience. "I am documenting my formal opposition to this action." Documented and understood. Emmanir returned to his station and began composing the message that would change everything. He started with mathematics, the universal language, prime numbers, basic arithmetic, geometric proofs, concepts that any technological species would recognize regardless of biological origin or cultural development. Then he included a diagram showing the solar system with the third planet marked, and a representation of the incoming coronal mass ejection with impact time clearly indicated using mathematical notation for temporal units. Finally, he added a brief introduction, simple, factual, honest. He calibrated it to convey peaceful intent without presuming friendly reception, neutral enough to avoid cultural misinterpretation. "We are Myrrathi. We have been observing your world. A solar event threatens your orbital infrastructure and surface systems. Impact in 65 hours. We want to help. We apologize for the intrusion. We offer this warning in peace." The translation algorithms converted the message into the dominant human language, what they called English. Emmanir reviewed it 17 times, checking for potential misinterpretations or cultural phrases that might carry unintended connotations. At 3:49 p.m. ship time, Praeth gave the authorization. The cascading wisdom transmitted. For 4 hours and 12 minutes, they waited. The human response time would depend on which organizations detected the transmission first, how quickly they could verify it was not a hoax, and how efficiently their fragmented command structures could coordinate a reply. The uncertainty was exhausting. The response came as an audio-visual transmission. It showed a human male, approximately mid-lifespan based on gray coloration in cranial hair and facial wear patterns. He wore formal attire and sat in an official-looking environment with symbols of authority visible behind him. His facial expression was controlled, disciplined, but Emmanir could see physiological markers of intense emotional arousal being carefully managed. Elevated heart rate, slight tremor in the hands, dilated pupils. "This is Director Ryland Thatcher of Earth's Deep Space Detection Initiative," the human said. His voice was measured, each word clearly enunciated with the precision of someone aware this was being recorded for historical significance. "We received your transmission at 7:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have confirmed the solar event using our own observation systems. We are grateful for the warning and have begun implementing emergency protective protocols." He paused, and something that the translation algorithms identified as a smile crossed his features. The expression showed teeth, which Emmanir's instincts initially interpreted as threat display, but the accompanying emotional markers suggested something more complex: relief, joy, wonder. "We've been looking for you for a very long time," Thatcher continued. "We have questions, so many questions, but first, thank you. Thank you for the warning, and thank you for reaching out. This is the greatest moment in human history." Emmanir felt something ease in his crystalline structure. The first exchange had been peaceful, hopeful. Perhaps contact would proceed smoothly after all. Then another transmission arrived. This one was not from Earth. Van processed it first, his structure flashing with colors of alarm that completely violated his usual emotional restraint. "Commander, we have incoming communication from Confederation Monitoring Station Delta 7. Source: Velthreen Observation Post. They detected our transmission." The Velthreen, one of the original founding species of the Confederation, conservative, cautious, deeply opposed to rapid expansion or contact with unknown species. They had voted against contact with the last 4 newly discovered civilizations, advocating instead for centuries of passive observation before any direct communication. They viewed themselves as the guardians of Confederation safety, the necessary voice of caution against impulsive action. The message was brief and formal, transmitted with the full authority of Confederation security protocols. "Unidentified Myrrathi vessel in System 43. You have violated Preservation Directive protocols. Cease all communication with indigenous species immediately. Confederation security fleet has been dispatched. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Do not escalate contact. Do not interfere further with natural development. Await arrival of authorized diplomatic personnel. High Arbiter Zelthan, Velthreen Security Council." Praeth read the message 3 times. Then she looked at her crew, her structure displaying colors of grim determination. "We're committed now," she said. "We warned them. The Velthreen know. We can't undo this. We can only move forward and hope we made the right choice. Emmanir, open a direct channel to Director Thatcher. If we're going to face consequences, we might as well make this count." The real-time communication was established within minutes. The encryption and translation protocols created slight delays, but it was close enough to genuine conversation. Thatcher appeared on the main display, now joined by 2 others. A woman identified as Dr. Isadora Vance, a xenopsychologist who had spent her career preparing theoretical frameworks for alien contact, and a man in military uniform, Commander Tycho Graves, whose role appeared to be security assessment and threat evaluation. Graves studied the visual representation of Emmanir with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess potential dangers. His posture suggested military discipline, but his expression showed something more complex: professional wariness layered with barely suppressed curiosity. "Dr. Emmanir Sulth," Thatcher said, pronouncing the name carefully, having clearly practiced the Myrrathi phonemes. "Thank you for the warning. We're mobilizing emergency protocols now. Power grids are being decoupled to prevent cascade failures. Satellites are being moved to protected orbits where possible. We're bringing vulnerable populations into shielded facilities. Your warning gave us the time we needed. Lives will be saved because of your decision." Honesty seemed essential at this moment. Deception would poison everything that came after. "Director Thatcher, you should know that my commander made this decision unilaterally, without authorization from our governing body. We've been watching your world for 48 days. We discovered you during a routine survey and were shocked to find intelligent life on what we classify as a Class 12 deathworld. We've been trying to understand you. The warning was not policy, it was conscience." Graves leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Class 12. That's the highest rating, isn't it?" His tone suggested he had already calculated the implications and was testing whether Emmanir would be truthful. Yes, it indicates conditions so hostile that complex life should be impossible. You are the first intelligent species we've encountered that evolved in such an environment. Your existence challenges fundamental assumptions about how and where intelligence can develop. And now your people know about us? Thatcher asked. This Confederation? Emmanir glanced at Praeth, who nodded permission to continue. Yes, a Confederation security species detected our transmission. They're sending a fleet. They arrive in approximately 70 hours. Before or after the solar storm? Graves asked with the tactical precision of someone trained to think in terms of timing and vulnerability. After, but not long after. Are they hostile? Emmanir considered the question carefully, aware that his answer would shape human expectations and potentially their response. Not hostile, cautious. The Velthreen believe in careful protocols for first contact. They'll want to establish quarantine procedures, study you from a distance, determine if contact is safe for all parties involved. Safe for whom? Graves's voice was sharp, carrying an edge of suspicion. For everyone. The Confederation has 17 member species. We've maintained peace for 2 millennia by being careful about expansion and integration. The Velthreen, in particular, are risk-averse. They view their caution as protecting both established species and newly discovered ones from potential harm. A deathworld species will alarm them. They'll see you as unpredictable, dangerous. Dr. Vance spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the measured tones of someone trained to analyze psychological states. Dr. Sulth, from your study of us, do you think we're dangerous? The question cut to the heart of everything. Emmanir thought about the footage he had watched over 48 days, humans pulling each other from wreckage, running impossible distances to deliver supplies, volunteering for rescues in toxic conditions, but also humans with weapons, humans in conflicts, humans capable of terrible violence when threatened. Every species had light and darkness, but humans seemed to exist at the extremes of both. I think you're capable of danger, he said honestly, but so is every intelligent species. The question isn't capability, it's choice. And from what I've observed, humans make surprising choices, sometimes terrible, but often better than circumstances should allow. Over the next 18 hours, while the cascading wisdom's dimensional drive completed its charging sequence, the two species talked. Thatcher coordinated Earth's emergency response to the approaching solar storm. Emmanir provided detailed tracking data and impact projections. Dr. Vance asked questions about Myrrathi psychology and Confederation structure. Graves maintained professional vigilance, but gradually relaxed his defensive posture. Trust began to build in small increments, information exchanged, perspectives shared. It was tentative and fragile, and remarkably hopeful. Then, at hour 19, Ixil made a proposal that represented everything Emmanir feared about first contact. The junior researcher appeared on the bridge with his structure vibrating with colors of excitement, overriding his still-developing caution. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying frequencies of barely contained enthusiasm. "The humans have invited us to their orbital station. They want to meet in person. They've prepared isolation protocols, separate atmospheres, physical barriers, no direct contact. But they want to be in the same physical space, to see us with their own eyes rather than through communication arrays." Praeth looked at Emmanir, seeking his assessment. The two had worked together for 7 cycles and had developed an effective working relationship built on mutual respect. She trusted his judgment on xenobiological matters. "Your assessment?" she asked. Emmanir processed the implications. "It's a significant gesture. It represents trust and willingness to take risks for the sake of deeper understanding. Refusing could damage the relationship, signal that we don't trust them or view them as too dangerous for proximity." Risks? Biological contamination despite isolation protocols, equipment failure, misunderstandings due to insufficient cultural knowledge, any of which could be fatal. We've had less than a month to study them. We don't know enough to guarantee safety. "But you want to go." Emmanir realized it was true. After 48 days of watching humanity through sensors and intercepted transmissions, he wanted to meet them, to see them in person, to stand in the same room, even separated by barriers and protocols, to look at intelligent life from a death world and understand what drove them. "Yes, I want to go." Ixil should accompany me. His enthusiasm might compensate for my excessive caution. Ixil's structure brightened with colors of joy at being selected. The young researcher had hoped for such an opportunity, but had not expected to be chosen for what was essentially the most significant xenological encounter in Myrrathi history. Praeth's matrix flickered with what might have been amusement. Approved, but full protocols, environmental suits, redundant isolation measures, constant monitoring. If anything feels wrong, if any safety parameter is exceeded, you abort immediately. Understood? Understood, Commander. The meeting was scheduled for 22 hours from that moment. Emmanir spent the time reviewing human social protocols, practicing responses to potential scenarios, preparing for every contingency his 48 years of experience could imagine. He did not imagine what actually happened. The shuttle ride to Earth's orbital station was smooth and carefully orchestrated. Human engineers and Myrrathi technicians worked together through remote communication, sharing technical specifications and safety requirements. The docking procedure took 3.5 hours of methodical safety checks, each step verified by both species before proceeding. When Emmanir and Ixil finally moved through the airlock into the specially prepared observation chamber, 3 humans were waiting on the other side of a transparent barrier. Director Ryland Thatcher looked older in person than he had appeared in transmissions. Gray hair carried traces of what had once been darker coloration. Lines radiated from his eyes, evidence of decades spent in gravitational environments. Hands showed signs of long use and minor scarring, but his expression carried carefully controlled wonder, the face of someone experiencing something they had dreamed about for years without quite believing it would happen. "Dr. Sulth," he said through speakers that translated his words into Myrrathi-compatible frequencies. "It's good to meet you in person, though I suppose person is technically the wrong word. Being, entity, individual. We'll work on the terminology." "Director Thatcher," Emmanir replied, studying the human with sensors that provided far more information than visual input alone. Elevated heart rate, increased respiration, hands held carefully still to avoid showing tremor, all markers of intense emotional arousal being carefully managed through conscious discipline. "The honor is ours." Dr. Vance stood beside Thatcher, her eyes moving rapidly as she analyzed every aspect of Emmanir's crystalline structure. Professional assessment mixed with barely suppressed fascination. She held a recording device that was capturing multiple data streams simultaneously. Emmanir recognized the impulse. She was doing exactly what he would do in her position, gathering every scrap of information possible from this unprecedented encounter. Commander Graves completed the trio, his posture suggesting military discipline, but his expression showing something more complex, wariness and curiosity fighting for dominance. His eyes tracked Emmanir's movements with the practiced attention of someone trained to assess threats, but his hands remained relaxed and away from any potential weapons. Defensive positioning without aggressive intent. They talked for 67 minutes about Earth's emergency preparations for the solar storm, about Myrrathi culture and the broader Confederation structure, about what humanity's discovery might mean for both species. It was productive and careful and remarkably hopeful. The barriers between them seemed less like protection and more like temporary inconvenience. Then Ixil moved closer to the barrier to examine the isolation seals. The junior researcher had always been curious to the point of incautiousness. It was his greatest strength as a scientist and his most concerning weakness in dangerous situations. He wanted to see everything, understand everything, examine every detail of how humans had engineered the isolation protocols. The seals were sophisticated for a species at humanity's technological level, employing multiple redundant layers. In that moment, driven by innocent curiosity, his appendage brushed against a seal junction that had been rated for 99.99% containment. The seal held. The protocols worked exactly as designed, but 0.01% of the barrier's microscopic surface area experienced a temporary pressure differential. For exactly 4.3 seconds, 0.003% of Earth's atmosphere made contact with Ixil's environmental suit. It was enough. Within 20 minutes, Ixil began exhibiting signs of distress, his crystalline structure showing irregular color patterns, energy distribution becoming uneven. Emmanir recognized the symptoms immediately with a horror that flooded his entire matrix: oxygen toxicity. Earth's atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, perfectly normal for humans, and catastrophically toxic to Myrrathi cellular matrices at that concentration. The brief exposure had introduced enough reactive oxygen species to initiate a cascade reaction in Ixil's delicate crystalline structure. Within an hour, Ixil's structure was breaking down at the molecular level. Both species' medical personnel mobilized with desperate urgency. Human doctors and Myrrathi medical officers shared data at unprecedented speed, trying experimental treatments, attempting everything their combined knowledge could devise. Venris worked alongside Dr. Vance, comparing biological analyses and searching for any intervention that might halt the cellular degradation. Nothing worked. The reactive oxygen attacked Ixil's crystalline matrix faster than any treatment could neutralize it. The damage propagated through molecular bonds, fracturing the delicate structures that maintained his cohesion and consciousness. As his matrix began its final fragmentation, Ixil's voice came through the communication system one last time. Weak, distorted by failing resonance structures, but clear enough to understand. "Emmanir," he whispered, his frequencies carrying harmonics of wonder even through the pain. "The humans, they're crying. Salt water from their eyes. For me. For someone they met 6 hours ago." Emmanir looked through the barrier. Dr. Vance had her hand pressed against the transparent wall, face wet with the involuntary emotional response he had documented on day 22. Even Graves had turned away, shoulders tight with barely controlled emotion. Thatcher stood rigid, his face showing the kind of grief usually reserved for personal losses. "They cry for everyone," Ixil whispered, his voice fading as his structure lost cohesion. "That's why they'll survive the stars. They care about everyone, even us, even after 6 hours. That's extraordinary. That's—" His structure completed its fragmentation, breaking into components that could no longer maintain consciousness or life. Emmanir stood in the observation chamber, watching his crewmate die, and felt something he had no adequate words for: loss and grief and terrible understanding. The first direct contact between species had killed one of them despite every precaution. Despite good intentions and careful engineering, the universe was cruel, biology was incompatible, and innocent curiosity had proven fatal. Thatcher was on the communication channel, his voice rough with distress and guilt. "I'm so sorry. We checked everything. We thought the protocols were sufficient. We were so careful. This is my fault. I authorized this meeting. I should have—" "They were sufficient," Emmanir said, his voice carrying frequencies of exhausted grief. 99.99% containment is excellent engineering for a species at your technological level. But 0.01% of catastrophically incompatible biochemistry is still fatal. This isn't your fault. It isn't Ixil's fault. It's the universe's fault. Our biologies are fundamentally incompatible in ways we didn't fully understand." "What do we do now?" Dr. Vance asked quietly, her face still wet with grief for someone she had barely known. Before Emmanir could respond, Commander Graves's voice came through a different channel, sharp and urgent with military precision, cutting through emotional turmoil. "Thatcher, we have a situation developing. Military command just detected the alien vessel. Multiple tracking systems have acquired the target. They're prepping a defensive response." "Stand them down immediately," Thatcher said, his voice cracking with strain. "That's a direct order from civilian authority." "Working on it, Director." But General Koskov's faction sees this as a hostile contact scenario. Unknown alien vessel in orbit, one of their people dead from exposure to our atmosphere. They're interpreting this as first contact gone wrong, potentially an attack. They're mobilizing defensive systems. Emmanir's sensors were already picking up targeting radars, locking onto the cascading Wisdom's position. Not from satellites, which were being protected against the approaching solar storm. From ground-based military installations with redundant power systems. Weapons-grade tracking systems calculating precise position data, range, and potential firing solutions. "Director Thatcher," Emmanir said carefully, forcing his structure to stabilize despite the grief still resonating through his matrix. "We're detecting what appears to be weapons targeting our ship, multiple systems calculating firing solutions." Thatcher's expression shifted to visible frustration and alarm. Professional composure fracturing under accumulated stress. Graves, how fast can you shut them down? Working on it, chain of command is fragmented due to solar storm preparations. Emergency protocols have been activated. Multiple commanders have authorization to act independently. Give me 10 minutes to coordinate shutdowns. We may not have 10 minutes, Van's voice said over the cascading wisdom's channel, his usually emotionless tone carrying edge of genuine alarm. Multiple targeting solutions have been calculated. If they fire, I cannot guarantee our defensive systems can intercept. We are still in dimensional drive recharge cycle. Maneuvering capabilities are limited. Praeth's voice joined the channel, carrying command authority that cut through rising panic. Director Thatcher, are we in immediate danger? No, Thatcher said firmly, though his expression suggested less certainty than his voice conveyed. The targeting is defensive posture, not offensive action. Some military elements are responding to your presence as a potential threat based on limited information. It's unauthorized. I'm shutting it down now with direct civilian override of military authority. You have 10 minutes, Praeth said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute deadline. If those weapon systems don't stand down, we're jumping to safety immediately regardless of dimensional drive status. We will not risk this entire crew because of your internal political conflicts. The next 9 minutes were excruciating. Emmanir watched targeting solutions refine on his display, listened to urgent human communications as Thatcher and Graves worked channels of authority to recall the alert, felt the weight of first contact balancing on the edge of catastrophe. One nervous commander, one premature launch, one failure of communication and coordination, any of it could cascade into violence. At minute 8, one targeting system went dark. At minute 9, the second deactivated. At minute 9 and 48 seconds, the final radar ceased tracking. Stand down confirmed, Graves reported, his voice carrying residual tension. General Koskov has been removed from command and placed under arrest for violation of civilian authority during first contact protocols. No one else is authorized for defensive actions without my direct approval or Director Thatcher's order. Praeth's voice carried some relief, but remained cautious. Can that order be countermanded? Can another military commander override your authority? Not without Director Thatcher's authorization, Graves said. But I need to be honest with you. Humans don't always follow orders perfectly. We're decentralized. We're afraid. Some of us react to fear with aggression. I'm doing everything I can to prevent further incidents, but I can't promise perfect compliance. There are thousands of independent military units, multiple chains of command. I can't control them all. Emmanir found himself respecting the honesty despite the danger it represented. Species that claimed perfect control were usually lying or delusional. Acknowledging limitations was more trustworthy than false promises. We understand. The Myrrathi are not a hive mind either. We have disagreements and failures of coordination. Perfect compliance with central authority is an illusion in any sufficiently complex society. Then an alarm sounded on the cascading wisdom, a new alert priority, maximum urgency. Van's voice carried frequencies of carefully controlled panic that was completely uncharacteristic for the disciplined navigator. Commander, I'm detecting a launch. Source, Military Installation Delta 7, Continental Designation North America. Classification, Hypersonic Interceptor. Trajectory is locked on our position. Impact in 50 seconds. The weapon struck the cascading wisdom's dimensional drive housing. The impact was not immediately catastrophic. The ship's defensive systems, designed for micrometeorite protection and debris avoidance, absorbed most of the kinetic energy. But the dimensional drive, in the middle of its post-jump recharge cycle, was particularly vulnerable at that moment. Delicate crystalline matrices that folded space-time were exposed during the recharge process. Those matrices fractured under the sudden stress, the precise molecular alignments that enabled faster-than-light travel, shattering like glass under hammer impact. Drive is offline, Van reported, his voice carrying frequencies of carefully controlled panic that violated his usual emotional restraint. Dimensional jump capability lost, estimating 6 weeks minimum for repairs if we can fabricate replacement matrices. We're stranded. On Earth, visible through the observation chamber's viewport, Emmanir could see organized chaos as Graves' people moved to secure the launch site. The weapon had been launched by a rogue military faction, immediately countermanded by chain of command, but too late to prevent the missile from completing its ballistic trajectory. The damage was done. Praeth appeared on the communication channel, her crystalline structure showing colors Emmanir had never seen from her before. Fury and fear layered together in patterns that spoke of barely controlled rage at the universe's cruel timing. First, Ixil's death. Now this. "Director Thatcher," she said, her voice deceptively calm in the way that preceded explosive reaction. "One of your people just fired on my ship. We are now unable to leave this system. We have a dead crew member, equipment damage, and in approximately 62 hours, a Confederation security fleet arrives to find us trapped here, unable to retreat, at the mercy of a species that just attacked us." Thatcher's face showed genuine horror, not calculated political horror, but real emotional devastation. "The responsible party is already in custody pending trial. I swear to you on everything humans hold sacred, this was not authorized. This was not policy. This was fear and stupidity and catastrophic failure of command authority. I will personally ensure accountability and justice." "That doesn't repair my ship," Praeth said, her structure pulsing with barely controlled anger. "No," Thatcher said, his voice steady despite visible emotional strain. "But we can help you survive what's coming. The solar storm hits in 38 hours. You can't jump to safety now. Your ship isn't designed to weather that radiation while stationary in orbit. You need shelter. You need human help. Let us help you." Emmanir felt the terrible symmetry of the situation. The Myrrathi had warned humanity about the storm, violating their own regulations to save human lives. Now, humanity needed to help the Myrrathi survive it, despite the death in the attack and the fear on both sides. "What are you proposing?" Praeth asked. "Bring your crew to the orbital station. We've already proven we can maintain isolated environments. You shelter here during the storm. We protect you. We protect each other. Then, when your security fleet arrives, we face them together and explain what happened, all of it. The accident, the attack, the attempt to work together despite everything going wrong." It was Venris who spoke next, her voice carrying frequencies of vindication layered with exhaustion. "I warned you. I warned all of you that contact would end in disaster. Now, Ixil is dead. We're stranded on a death world, and we're dependent on the very species that shot us down for survival. This is exactly the outcome I predicted." "It was a faction," Emmanir said quietly, his structure dimmed with grief but still capable of analysis. "Not the species. Part of humanity attacked us. Another part is offering to save us. Both are true. Both matter." "That distinction may not matter when the Velthreen arrive," Venris said, her structure dark with implications. "They will see a dead Myrrathi and a damaged ship. They will hear about weapons fire. They will make judgments, and those judgments will determine humanity's future in the Confederation. If they have a future at all." But Praeth was already making the decision, her structure stabilizing into patterns of resolved determination. "We accept your offer, Director Thatcher. We'll evacuate to your station. But understand, if this goes wrong, if there are more attacks, if your protective measures fail, we will defend ourselves with whatever capabilities remain to us." "Understood and accepted. We'll defend you too. Until the end." The evacuation took 6 hours of careful transfer procedures. 7 Myrrathi crew members were moved to the human orbital station, each placed in isolated environmental chambers with independent life support systems, triple-checked by both species engineers. The cascading wisdom was left in orbit, its systems on minimal power, its dimensional drive a fractured ruin that would take weeks to repair under ideal conditions. Emmanir found himself in a small chamber with a viewport showing Earth rotating below. The planet looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, blue and white and beautiful in the way that concealed its violence. Somewhere down there, billions of humans went about their lives, some afraid of the aliens in orbit, some fascinated, some indifferent. Humanity adapting to the new reality the way they adapted to everything, messily, creatively, persistently. The solar storm hit at hour 38 with spectacular violence, visible even from the shielded interior of the station. Emmanir watched through reinforced viewports as the coronal mass ejection slammed into Earth's magnetosphere. Charged particles cascaded down magnetic field lines in luminous streams, creating auroras visible all the way to the equator. Electromagnetic pulses rippled through the upper atmosphere in waves. Satellites in unprotected orbits flared and died, their electronics fried by radiation. Power grids on the surface experienced cascading failures despite preparation, backup systems activating in cascading sequences as primary systems overloaded. The cascading wisdom, still in orbit with minimal shielding and no maneuvering capability, took catastrophic radiation damage. Its communication array burned out in the first radiation wave. Secondary systems failed in the second. By the third wave, the ship was effectively dead in space, an inert crystalline hull tumbling slowly in orbit. But the human station held. Its shielding was crude by Myrrathi standards, layered metal and ablative materials, and magnetic deflection rather than elegant multispectral field systems. But it worked with the redundancy humans built into everything. When one system became saturated, backups activated. When backups strained, tertiary systems engaged. The Myrrathi crew survived in their isolated chambers while radiation levels outside would have killed them in minutes. Emmanir watched the planet below and saw human civilization responding to the crisis in real time. Power grids implementing emergency protocols with the speed that only pre-planned responses could achieve. Backup systems activating across entire continents. Emergency response teams deploying to prioritize critical infrastructure. It was chaotic and imperfect and remarkably effective for a species with such fragmented authority structures. The translation algorithms provided running tallies of casualty estimates, updating as human emergency broadcasts reported numbers. Initial projections had suggested 8 million deaths or more without warning. The actual toll, as it became clear over the following hours, stabilized at 2,043 humans. In a global population exceeding 8 billion, it was statistically minimal. The warning had worked. Millions had survived who would have died. The storm lasted 19 hours. When it passed, Earth had taken damage, but the planet remained intact. Humanity had weathered another assault from their violent universe. They would mourn their dead, repair their infrastructure, learn from the experience, and continue. And 22 hours later, the Velthreen arrived. 4 Velthreen warships exited dimensional space at the edge of Sol system, with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested they had calculated their arrival for maximum psychological impact. They were massive vessels, each one displacing enough mass to be visible on gravitational sensors. Their hulls were dark and angular, built more for intimidation than elegance. Weapon ports were visible across their surfaces, making their combat capability unmistakable. High Arbiter. Zelthon's transmission came through on all frequencies, ensuring every communication device in the system received it simultaneously. His voice carried the harmonic weight of absolute authority backed by military force. Unidentified World Designated System 43-3. You are hereby placed under Confederation quarantine protocols pending full security assessment, species designation pending evaluation, preliminary classification, hazard class Alpha. No contact with Confederation members is permitted until security assessment is complete. Any attempt to leave your system will be interpreted as hostile action and will be met with appropriate force. Emmanir felt his structure go cold with a sensation he recognized as dread. Hazard Class Alpha. The highest threat rating in Confederation nomenclature, reserved for species deemed existentially dangerous to Confederation stability. Species classified Alpha were typically quarantined for centuries until they either proved themselves safe or destroyed themselves through internal conflict. Thatcher's response was immediate and public, broadcast on the same frequencies to ensure everyone heard humanity's reply. High Arbiter Zelthon of the Velthreen. I am Director Ryland Thatcher, speaking for the species you designated Hazard Class Alpha. We call ourselves human. We did not initiate this contact. We did not request it. But we will not be quarantined for the crime of existing on a planet you find uncomfortable. You will comply with Confederation security protocols, Zelthon replied, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that the translation algorithms rendered as absolute certainty backed by force. You have already demonstrated the exact dangers we predicted. One Myrrathi is dead, another ship is damaged. This is precisely the outcome we warned would result from contact with deathworld species. History and statistics support our position overwhelmingly. Praeth entered the communication, her voice carrying command authority despite her damaged ship and stranded position. Hi, Arbiter. This is Commander Praeth of the Cascading Wisdom. The death of Ixil was an accident resulting from biochemical incompatibility we didn't fully understand. The damage to my ship was caused by an unauthorized human faction that has been arrested and is facing justice under their legal systems. Neither incident represents policy or intent from either species. Intent is irrelevant, Zelthon said, his voice inflexible. Capability is what matters for security assessment. These creatures killed a Myrrathi within hours of direct contact. They damaged a Confederation vessel through unauthorized use of military force. They survived and developed technology on a Class 12 deathworld, which suggests exceptional adaptability and resilience under hostile conditions. Historical precedent is absolutely clear. Deathworld species are destabilizing elements in any interstellar community. They must be contained for the safety of all parties. Emmanir had been listening carefully to the exchange, analyzing the political currents beneath the formal language. This was not really about humanity. This was about Confederation philosophy, about whether peace was maintained through caution or through trust, about whether new members were threats to be contained or potential partners to be integrated. He opened his own channel, broadcasting to all Confederation frequencies, knowing this would be the most important communication of his life. Hi, Arbiter Zelthon. This is Dr. Emmanir Sulth, xenobiologist, 50 years of survey experience, currently attached to the Cascading Wisdom. I was present when Ixil died. I was present when the human attacked our ship. I saw all of it, and I need to tell the Confederation what I learned. There was a pause. Then Zelthon's voice, carefully controlled. Speak, Dr. Sulth. Emmanir took a moment to organize his thoughts. Everything hung on finding the right words, on conveying truth in a way that could be heard through fear and prejudice. You're correct that humans killed Ixil, he began. But you're wrong about why. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't violence. It was biology. Our atmospheres are incompatible at the molecular level. We tried to meet in person with proper protocols. Our engineers and theirs worked together to design isolation systems. We achieved 99% containment, but a microscopic seal failure exposed Ixil to 0.03% Earth atmosphere for 4.3 seconds. That was enough. The humans tried desperately to save him. Their medical personnel worked alongside ours. They shared data. They attempted experimental treatments. They did everything their technology and knowledge could provide. Ixil died because the universe is cruel and biology is incompatible, not because humans are violent. He paused, letting that truth settle. The attack on our ship is equally instructive. It came from a rogue military faction that feared us. They saw an unknown alien vessel in orbit while their world faced a solar storm. They responded defensively out of fear and inadequate information. Their leadership immediately arrested the responsible parties and offered us sanctuary. When our ship was damaged and we couldn't protect ourselves from the solar radiation, humans gave us shelter. They protected us during the storm that we had warned them about. We saved each other, High Arbiter. Both species chose cooperation over fear. Zelthon's response carried frequencies of skepticism. This proves my point rather than refuting it. A fractured species with decentralized authority structures, factions acting independently, military elements with insufficient centralized oversight. This is exactly the instability we seek to avoid in Confederation membership. No, Emmanir said, his structure brightening with conviction. This is precisely the resilience we should embrace. Humans aren't unified under absolute central control. They're diverse, decentralized, argumentative. They have 19 different language families, hundreds of distinct cultural groups, multiple competing governmental structures. But when they face existential crisis, they coordinate. They cooperate. They survived the solar storm because they could adapt faster than our careful hierarchies could ever manage. Their redundancy is their strength. He pulled up the footage he had been compiling over 49 days. "I'm transmitting comprehensive data now to all Confederation worlds. Watch it. See what I've seen over weeks of observation." The data transmission included everything. Humans responding to earthquakes and hurricanes, pulling each other from wreckage, running supplies across destroyed infrastructure, coordinating responses across cultural and political boundaries that should have prevented cooperation. And critically, footage of the solar storm response. Human emergency teams working with remarkable precision, backup systems activating in cascading sequences, casualty numbers far below projections because they had used the warning effectively. "They're not just survivors," Emmanir said. "They're optimizers. They build redundancy into everything. They prepare for disasters they've never experienced. They plan for contingencies that might never occur. They see patterns in chaos and make intuitive leaps that lead to technological breakthroughs. They're products of a death world, yes, but that doesn't make them violent by nature. It makes them incredibly, frustratingly difficult to kill. And that persistence, that refusal to give up, might be exactly what the Confederation needs." Corvin joined the transmission, adding his cultural analysis. "High Arbiter, I've spent weeks studying human culture. There's a concept that appears universally across every society I could access. They call it hope. It's the belief that the future can be better than the present despite evidence to the contrary. Every culture incorporates it. Every philosophical system embraces it in some form. They're optimists because pessimists don't survive on death worlds. That hope drives their entire civilization forward." Another voice joined the channel, Dr. Vance, speaking carefully with the measured tones of someone aware they were addressing powers that could determine their species' future. "High Arbiter Zelthon, may I address the Confederation?" A long pause. Then, with what sounded like reluctant curiosity, "Speak." "I'm Dr. Isadora Vance, human xenopsychologist. I've spent my career preparing for this moment, preparing for contact with alien intelligence. We have thousands of years of philosophy about how first contact should proceed. Careful protocols, slow exchanges of information, mutual respect built gradually over time. We believed we were ready." Her voice carried emotional frequencies that the translation algorithm struggled to render accurately. Grief and shame and desperate hope layered together. "We were not ready. We killed one of you by accident through our biological incompatibility. We attacked your ship through fear and inadequate command authority. We've made every mistake we swore we would avoid, but we're learning. That's what humans do, High Arbiter. We make terrible mistakes, and then we learn from them with desperate speed. We've spent 200,000 years surviving on Earth by adapting faster than the world could kill us. If you give us a chance, we'll adapt to the galaxy too. We'll learn, we'll improve, we'll become worthy of the opportunity you might grant us." "You ask for trust you have not earned," Zelthon said, his voice carrying harmonics of inflexibility. "No," Thatcher said, entering the exchange with quiet intensity. "We ask for the same chance every Confederation species received when they were first discovered. The opportunity to prove ourselves. The chance to fail or succeed based on our choices and our actions, not your assumptions about what we might do. You've watched us for less than a month. You've seen us at our worst, facing crisis and making mistakes. But you've also seen us trying, reaching out, choosing cooperation despite fear. That has to count for something." The silence that followed stretched for exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds. Emmanir could imagine the furious debate happening on the Velthreen command ships, conservative factions arguing for immediate quarantine, progressive elements citing the precedents of past contact situations, military advisors calculating risk, diplomats weighing political implications. Then Zelthon spoke again. "The Confederation Council will debate this matter. All member species will have their say. This is not a decision I can make alone, nor should I. Stand by for transmission of formal debate protocols." The Confederation debate that followed was broadcast across all member worlds, transmitted in real time so billions of beings could observe their government grappling with the most significant decision in recent history. 17 species weighing in, multiple factions within each species arguing among themselves. The Velthreen delegation argued passionately that deathworld species represented existential risk that no amount of potential benefit could justify. The Myrrathi delegation was divided, with traditional conservatives agreeing with Zelthon, while progressive elements cited Emmanir's research and advocated for provisional contact. Smaller species contributed perspectives shaped by their own histories. The architects spoke of their own first contact with the Myrrathi millennia ago, when the young and emotional crystalline beings had seemed potentially dangerous. The Kelthan described their integration despite biochemical incompatibilities that required extensive adaptation. The Vryn argued that diversity strengthened the Confederation rather than threatening it. The debate took 6 hours of intense deliberation with procedural pauses and caucusing periods. Emmanir watched with his structure, cycling through anxious color patterns. Everything hung on this vote: humanity's future, the Confederation's direction, proof that the risk Praeth had taken had been justified, or confirmation that Venris had been right all along. Finally, High Arbiter Zelthon called for formal vote on the primary motion. Motion 1, immediate indefinite quarantine of System 43-3 with no direct contact permitted pending centuries of passive observation. The vote proceeded in formal order of Confederation seniority. Each species delegation announced their position. The tallies accumulated with agonizing slowness. Velthreen, in favor of quarantine. Architects, opposed to quarantine. Myrrathi, abstaining due to internal division. Kelthan, opposed to quarantine. Vryn, in favor of quarantine. The votes continued. Species Emmanir had barely heard of contributing their positions, some citing fear, others advocating for opportunity. The tally remained close throughout. When the final count was complete, the result was almost perfectly balanced. 9 species in favor of quarantine, 8 species opposed. The motion passed by a single vote. Emmanir felt his structure go dark with defeat. They had failed. Humanity would be isolated. Praeth's sacrifice had been for nothing. Ixil had died for a first contact that would now be locked away for centuries. But then a new voice entered the channel. Ancient, resonant in ways that suggested vastly different vocal apparatus than any previously heard. The architect species, who rarely spoke in Confederation debates beyond their formal vote, now chose to address the entire council. "We invoke right of reconsideration," the architect said, their voice carrying the weight of millennia. "And we propose an alternative motion." Zelthon's voice carried surprise. "The vote has concluded." "The right of reconsideration exists precisely for moments like this," the architect replied, "when a vote is close and an alternative approach might find broader support. We propose Motion 2, provisional contact under restrictive protocols, pending human compliance with security measures and supervised integration." The chamber fell silent. This was different. Not full quarantine, not unrestricted contact. A middle path that might satisfy both cautious and progressive factions. The debate began anew, but now focused on specific terms rather than binary choices. What restrictions would be sufficient? What supervision necessary? What timeline appropriate? Species that had voted for quarantine now had to decide if supervised contact was acceptable. Species that had opposed quarantine had to evaluate whether the proposed restrictions were reasonable or excessive. Another 2 hours of intense negotiation. Amendments proposed and rejected. Compromises forged and refined. Finally, the revised motion was presented for vote. Motion 2, provisional contact authorization with the following terms: humanity prohibited from independent faster-than-light development without Confederation supervision, prohibited from contacting new species without authorization, must accept monitoring outposts in their system, must submit to biocontainment protocols for all physical contact with other species. Provisional status subject to review after 50 years. The vote proceeded. The tension was unbearable. Everything came down to this moment: 50 years of supervised membership versus centuries of isolation. When the final tally was complete, the result was almost as close as before. 10 species in favor of provisional contact, 7 species opposed. The motion passed. Humans would be granted limited Confederation access under terms that made Emmanir's structure ache with complicated emotions. They would be probationary members, supervised, restricted, watched, but members nonetheless, included rather than isolated, given a chance rather than condemned by assumption. In the human orbital station, Thatcher listened to the terms with a carefully neutral expression. When the transmission ended, he looked at Emmanir through the isolation barrier separating their chambers. "We're in," he said quietly, but as probationary children under armed supervision. "As a species that frightened an 8,000-year-old civilization enough to need special rules," Emmanir replied. "No one else has managed that. Be proud." Should we be proud of being terrifying? Emmanir thought about everything he had witnessed, the disasters and the responses, the accidents and the rescue attempts, the fear and the hope layered together. Ixil dying while humans wept for him. Praeth sacrificing her career to save millions. Humans offering shelter when the Myrrathi needed it most, despite the attacks and the fear. "Be proud of what comes next," he said. "Be proud of the choices you make with this opportunity. That's what matters." Through the viewport, Earth rotated below in its violent, beautiful way. The Velthreen fleet maintained position in high orbit, 4 massive warships serving as both protection and prison. Down on the surface, billions of humans continued their lives, most unaware that their species had just joined a galactic community that did not fully trust them. Monitoring outposts would be established, restrictions implemented, supervision maintained. The path forward would be difficult and uncertain. Thatcher moved closer to the barrier, his reflection distorted in the transparent material separating their biochemically incompatible atmospheres. "My people have a saying," he said quietly. "It's not how you start, it's how you finish." And how do humans finish? For the first time since Ixil's death, Thatcher smiled. It was a strange expression, showing teeth in what Emmanir's instincts initially interpreted as threat display. But the human emotional markers suggested something else entirely. Determination, hope, that peculiar human optimism that persisted despite evidence. "We'll figure it out," Thatcher said. "We always do." Emmanir watched the blue planet rotating below and wondered if hope was contagious, wondered if the Confederation had just made the best decision of its 8,000-year history, or the worst. The future was unknown, the outcome uncertain, the risks extraordinary. But they had chosen to take those risks together. And perhaps that was enough.